Hi, and welcome back to the Humanizing Success podcast, where we delve into the journeys of successful individuals from all walks of life. I'm your host, Jake Bennon, and today we have the pleasure of speaking with David Pierce. David runs his own practice as a longtime successful lawyer. He's an amazing father to his two children, Braxton and Maddie, and has been married to his incredible wife and my second mom, Alicia, for almost 30 years, right?
Yeah.
Yep. And David's a longtime family friend. We actually met because Braxton, his eldest son, and I were in second grade together, and we kind of just hit it off. And from then, we were friends and family friends, and just been a part of each other's lives. So, first of all, I wanted to ask you about yourself, a little bit about your profession. So, what is your profession? How long have you been doing it?
I'm a lawyer,
Yes.
so I've been a licensed attorney all in California since 1990,
Okay.
so 33
A
years
couple of years, yeah.
plus, and have my own private practice. Didn't start off that way.
Right. So the follow-up question to that would be, when did you create your private practice, and why did you do that?
So I went to law school in Sacramento, even though I was in Colorado at the time,
Okay.
and came out to California because that's where I was born and really wanted to be with family ultimately. Right. So from Sacramento, which is where half of my family was,
Okay.
My dad's side, I ended up going down to the Los Angeles area, which is where we're at now. And started in 1990, started with, well, to back up a little bit, I was working for State Farm Insurance.
Okay.
As a claims adjuster at the time in Colorado.
Okay.
And
was that after so was law school before or after that?
So I went to University of Colorado,
right,
in Boulder.
Right.
And after that, didn't really know what to do. I mean, I can back up even further than that, but ultimately ended up at State Farm Insurance.
Okay.
And worked there a couple of years, worked with different lawyers sometimes in claims.
Sure.
And ultimately ended up going to law school after a couple of years. So State Farm placed me, thank God, with some of the big law firms they were using at that time in Sacramento. So I got my law clerk experience there, and then ultimately ended up in Los Angeles.
And before State Farm, was law on your radar at all, or was that idea just from your experience through State Farm?
So you want to go way back?
Oh, we get there as we get there, but
sure.
Okay.
Law was on my radar before that.
Okay.
So growing up, my dad is a retired rocket scientist, literally.
Right. I do remember that.
He was in aerospace, and he made a decent salary, not huge.
Okay.
But he wanted a tax break. And
Sure.
So I remember when my brother and I were still in high school, he decided the tax break would be to buy investment properties. So he started with a fourplex.
Okay.
And over a 10-year span, that fourplex turned into 100 different units. Well, that stress and different litigation led to my parents' divorce.
Okay.
But during that time, I got to witness a lawyer in particular representing them, a litigator in Colorado.
Okay.
And it was during the winter, as Colorado has a lot of snow.
A little bit, yeah.
In Denver, and it was very cold, and Gary was his first name. I don't remember his last name. But he had this long, almost like a trench coat.
Okay.
It was very regal.
It's funny the things that we remember. Like I'm sure that was a specific in your image that you have in your
head. He had, this was in the 80s.
Yeah.
Or maybe even late 70s. And he had this awesome suit with the tie and just very dapper. And then when he spoke and carried the leather briefcase, and then when he spoke in court, it was so powerful. And I thought, wow, I didn't even know that profession existed.
Sure.
And that really, really intrigued me.
Yeah.
And so that was my first interest or awakening to the possibility of law.
Gotcha. And then, so how did you get to the point where you said, so I guess let's go a little bit further. You got your law degree, and where was the first place that, because you didn't have your private practice initially, right?
No.
So where did you work initially to get your experience, to get that first taste, I guess?
So as a law clerk in Sacramento, where State Farm had placed me
Right.
with, I worked for two different firms up there. They're
Okay.
well-known firms. I ended up being, I was always a good writer from high school, and ended up writing legal briefs. Ultimately, the firms were large enough that they could afford and handle several law clerks.
Okay.
So at one point, I was the head law clerk for this one particular law firm. And
How old were you at that point?
well, I'd already worked for a couple years after college.
Okay.
And I had also started on my master's, because right
Okay,
out of my
interesting.
bachelor's degree, I didn't know what to
Sure. So what was your master's in at that point?
do. Business.
Okay.
So the way I ended up down that route on business is I first wanted, I know we're sort of all over the place here,
Yeah, that's okay.
but in college, I wanted to be a veterinarian
Okay.
because I loved animals, grew up on horses and that sort of thing.
I
right?
feel like I also thought that when I was younger, but
Yeah.
as soon as you love animals and you're like, okay, well, I can take care of animals for the rest of my life. That was something that I also had a thought of. But,
Yeah, no, I worked in a veterinary hospital for a year.
okay, wow, you took some
Actually,
action on that.
Yeah, I took some action on that. I went to them in Boulder, Colorado, and
Mhm.
said, I'll work for free. I just want this on my resume.
Yeah.
And they said, well, we have to pay you. That's the law.
Sure.
We can't. So I made minimum wage or
Yeah.
whatever it was. But I worked there for a year. Then, so I was a biology major.
Okay, wow.
After I was an engineering major.
Okay.
So I started off right out of high school in engineering
So you can change your mind.
all the time.
You should.
And you should.
Yeah.
That's how you grow.
Right.
So I started off in engineering, taking physics and calculus and
Okay.
all this stuff, because that's what my dad was.
Sure.
And I went from straight A's in high school to straight C's in college.
Okay.
Never got a C in my life. It was a rude awakening. And I thought, okay,
Was that due to the difficulty of the classes, or?
It was due to me being 17.
Sure, the atmosphere.
And being away from mom and dad, and just having fun in college and not attending class, really.
It happens.
So then after that, I thought, well, maybe I need to find something else. So I took, at 18 years old at that time, I decided to take everything I could find that ended in ology.
Okay.
No rhyme or reason to it other
Right.
than that was sort of cutesy. That's sort of where my brain was at the time.
Sure.
Got straight D's
Okay.
in college. Almost got kicked out of college.
Oh.
I had to meet with the dean, and the dean at the end of the semester said, all right, during the break, you need a 3-unit course. You either get an A and stay in college, or you're out.
Or you don't. Wow.
I jammed and pulled back to my roots of studying, which I did in high school, and got the A.
Yeah.
So I remained in school and worked my GPA back up over the following years.
Wow.
So what started off in engineering ended up going into biology as a biology major. And that's where I wanted to get into vet school. At that time, there were 22 vet schools in the nation.
Okay.
So it was more difficult to get into than med school.
Oh, wow.
So I thought, all right, my grandmother at the time had a heart attack.
Okay.
And so I wanted to save the world and become a heart surgeon.
Sure.
So I needed a bio major or something similar.
Right.
Took organic chemistry.
No,
Done.
wasn't it?
done. The math part I was okay with, surprisingly.
Okay.
It was the memorization of all the elements and
Sure.
the mechanics of that. This isn't for me.
Yeah.
So I was already halfway through college
Okay.
at that time. My roommate at the time was a business major, and I turned to him, Greg was his name, and said, okay, how do I change to a business major? It seems more applicable in the world. I don't want to get stuck in a lab
Right.
with a bio major. So I want diversity. I want to be able to get out there. And he said, well, you can't really, you're in the arts and sciences school. If you were to change to business school, you'd have to start all over again.
Sure.
And you'd lose all those units. So what's the closest thing to business in the arts and sciences school?
Right.
Economics.
Okay.
So I graduated with an economics major.
Wow.
That's how I got there.
And so you were flunking, and what, I guess a lot of times when people are, and then you had a loved one passed away, and when these kind of things like compound, and
my grandma survived.
Oh, okay. Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
No, that's
I just
okay.
assumed. So she had a heart attack.
Yeah.
And so there's a couple things that are happening negative at one time.
For sure.
And how did you sort of decide that, okay, I'm not going to let these things determine at such a young age, I would say?
So my father was actually instrumental in that he, I mean, obviously he went to so many years of school.
Right.
I think 11 years post high school to get his PhDs and all this stuff. He was very driven for whatever reason. He was one of 7 brothers and sisters. He ended up he went to junior college, Yuba City College, right out of high school in Northern California, which is a small JC, and got good enough grades where he transferred to Berkeley.
Okay.
Got his undergrad, and then ultimately got placed in some engineering job with one of the big, Litton, Lockheed, whatever.
Okay.
And then went to get his master's at UCLA and then his PhD at USC. All fantastic schools.
Yeah.
So he was always very driven. So when I got straight C's, his antennas went up. And then when I got straight D's, forget it. I mean, he said to me, son, school's not for everyone.
Right.
So I had a fork in the road.
And that's kind of crazy for him to say. I mean, with all of his, I'm sure he had an emphasis on getting good grades or things
for
like
sure.
that.
And school and education,
Right.
We were always going to college. That wasn't an option
for
us at the time. And for him to say that, it was a fork in the road for me. So I had to decide, all right, well, is this a real kick in the ass in a positive way or negative way?
Right.
So for me, I took the positive route.
Okay.
And
I'm just going to move this.
Said, I'm going to show him.
Okay.
Basically.
Sure.
So because of the litigation with the apartment buildings and that sort of thing, he hated lawyers.
Okay. From that experience.
And my attitude was, well, if you can't beat them, join them.
Okay.
And so for me, that was the motivating factor for me to get my act together.
Gotcha. So his response there was a little bit of a kick in the butt and
big one, because I was floundering.
Yeah.
I was, and it wasn't that I probably was lost, but I didn't feel that way.
Right.
I was just a kid exploring whatever presented it that day.
Right. You weren't looking that big. You were.
No, I wasn't thinking about it at all.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
I didn't put a lot of thought into it. I just put one foot in front of the other. I was always driven.
Mm-hmm.
That's just in my DNA. But I think my dad was a large part of that.
Gotcha. And so you finally opened your private practice.
Yeah.
And obviously, you were in the law field a bit before that. You have to be, but I feel like it's a big step whenever you jump to, okay, I'm going to be independent and do my own thing, and now I have people relying on me and these responsibilities. So, Was there a point, especially in the beginning, where you were like, I have no idea what I'm doing, or maybe I want to quit or something like that?
Okay, so I started off with, medium-sized firm, whatever. I
Yeah.
started off in Century City,
Okay.
actually. And for me, growing up in Colorado, that was too pretentious for
Sure.
me. A lot of pressure, just
Yeah,
every
absolutely.
step of the
Yeah.
way. And it just wasn't my cup of tea. So I changed law firms,
Okay.
ended up with a mid-sized firm again. And this time I worked there for 8 years.
Okay.
So I worked there 91 to 99.
Wow.
Worked there for 8 years. And I remember the impetus to me starting my own firm.
Okay. I was just gonna say we have to know what was there a telltale?
Again, it was failure.
Okay.
So this failure was all right. So I was referred to as the golden boy because I would crank out we had a minimum amount of hours.
Yeah.
That wasn't good enough for me. I
Sure.
was going to crank it out, and so I was a high biller at that firm, so they loved me. Meanwhile, they're paying me X and they're making Y,
Right.
and this isn't lost on me. It's not lost on any employee or associate. So I pushed, and I ultimately forced them, I think they would have never done it, to make me a junior partner.
Okay.
Well, what does that mean? It was very ambiguous. So that didn't really satisfy me, but I thought, okay, well, that's a step in the right direction
Sure.
that I want to go. And I remember at that time there were different carrots, there were different incentives that the law firm would have. If you brought cases in, you'd
Sure.
get a piece of the action.
Okay.
Okay. So I remember at that time a case that I brought in that you didn't have to work on the case, that I would get a percentage of the firm's fee.
Okay.
So the case settled in December of a particular year.
Yeah.
And I became partner in January the next month.
Gotcha.
By the time the settlement check came in, it was January.
Okay.
Nothing said. Week goes by. I walked into the partner's office, said, "Hey, I know the check came in,
Right.
so I'd like to be compensated," or whatever I said at that time. And he said, "Oh no, you don't need to be paid a percentage of that. Now you're making a percentage of the entire firm."
So the agreement we had before was X'd out.
Yeah, null and void.
Yeah.
And I thought, wait a minute, that's not fair.
Yeah.
That's not what we talked about. And so at the end of the year, law firm bonuses are generous.
Okay.
At the end of the year, I ended up getting the general bonus, my first year as a partner, for $1,000 more than what I should have had coming just based on my referral before.
Wow.
So to me, I got a $1,000 bonus.
Right. That was
I was pissed.
Yeah, little job right there.
Yeah. So I literally walked down the hall to someone that I was instrumental into bringing into the firm. Hadn't really talked to him before, but it was a whole different area of law.
Okay.
And said, "Want to go to lunch?"
Let's get out of here.
So and he claims that he knew exactly what I was talking about.
Sure.
So we went on a walk, and in that one walk during lunch, we decided we're breaking off. We're going to open our own practice.
Wow.
So it was another kick in the ass for me.
Yeah, I think we're seeing here, but in general, I think failure is a kind of a trend when it comes to success. And
I think it's key.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think it's absolutely key. If things are given to you and they come too easy, what's going to drive you to push yourself?
So another point I wanted to talk about with this conversation with you was relationships, and you're a successful father, dad, and as well as husband. And so one of the things that I spoke a little bit about with Alina, and we kind of just touched on here, and I agree failure is part of the road to success and is essential. And so when it comes to kids, how much almost help versus making it harder versus challenging? How did you figure out a little bit, maybe drawing that line, or what to help them with, where to guide them or give them the answer?
So the old adage, you want your kids to do better than you.
Sure.
That remains true. But along the way, tough love is required as well.
Right.
So it is a true balance. And as many parenting books as there are out there, and therapists and
Do those
everything
help,
else,
by the way?
maybe when they're babies,
Okay.
they give you some basics,
Yeah.
but no, there's nothing like experience.
Yeah, of course.
In fact, on that word, that just triggered something.
Yeah, go for it.
I pulled up a saying on the word experience that I just shared with my kids the other day. Now I just got to find it. So experience is the hardest kind of teacher. It gives you the test first and the lesson afterwards. Oscar Wilde. It's really true.
Yeah.
Really very
Wow.
true. So you don't recognize that when you're going through it, but I personally have always worried about giving the kids too much.
Right.
I want them to know and understand responsibility. I think that is truly important, especially in today's world. And I was always raised that way. You know, my parents had very tough love with us.
Sure.
Sometimes too extreme, in my opinion. But as a result, you can't change the past.
Absolutely.
So honestly, I wouldn't change a thing with how we were raised.
Right.
Because to me, that makes up your DNA, your character. And so it provides certain drives.
Yeah.
And it provides especially guides for you raising your own children.
So I was listening to, as I've started this podcast, and before, I've been listening to more and more podcasts, and there's this podcast called Diary of a CEO.
Mm-hmm.
And he spoke with the previous chief of very, very smart guy from Google, Microsoft. He was involved in all those things. His name's Mo Kobach or something. And he did a study where he asked people about the most difficult times in their lives, where they failed the most, and like terrible situations in their lives. And he asked them, would you give up that experience? But it meant that anything you gained from it, any people you met from it,
Mm-hmm.
anything good, even a little bit that you may have gained from it, it would be erased. And 99% of the people said no matter. And he said these were like traumatic experiences that
Sure.
people went through. And so it is the key to growing. And what I found is learning, and kind of blew my mind that how true it is, really.
Yeah. No, look, good judgment is based on experience, and experience is based on bad judgment.
Right.
So if you really think about that, you need to go through the trials and tribulations of life to even stand a remote chance of success.
Yeah. I mean, of course, there's a certain extent that we want to protect our kids, and saying we want to protect. I have a couple of years, but I've been thinking about it because I have a girlfriend for a little while now, and we think about future marriage and kids. We've talked about a little bit here and there. And so it makes you kind of think about, well, where is the line on how much I want to help my kids, and what I want to give them, and what I want them to learn. And obviously protection is a very important thing.
For sure. But let me put a caveat on that. You want to protect your kids, but sometimes when it's easy to jump in, you just need to let it ride.
Right.
And you need them to experience. It's almost like driving a car. If you go from here to Ralph's or something, if you're in the passenger seat and you get back, you might not remember how to get there.
Right.
But if you're driving, you could do it again.
That was a very good way to put it.
Right? So it's the same thing in life. You need to let the kids take the driving wheel. And the test that Alicia, my wife, and I have always used is and this isn't true for everything, but just to kind of give you a concept. When the kids were little and they were really exploring their physicality on the jungle gym in the park or wherever, the true test for us was, will it kill them?
Right. Are they in immediate danger?
Right. If they're only going to break an arm, let them do it.
Right. Wow.
So, I'll give you another, your best friend, Braxton.
Yeah.
He started playing football very early on.
Okay.
And he was with the Mighty Mites in Santa Monica.
Sure.
And they're yay
tall. I remember seeing
and,
pictures of this.
Yeah. So that's the first time they suit up.
Okay.
It's not just flag or touch. It's
first time it's tackle.
It's right. They hit each other.
Yeah.
So I remember at one point, it really opened my eyes because I said, Braxton, hit. Use your muscles. You really, He says, Daddy, if I use all my muscles, I'll hurt them. I don't want to hurt anyone, Right. And it dawned on me, we always taught the kids, don't touch another. That's their space.
Right.
You need to be, cognizant of everyone's space and give them. And in contact sports, it's the opposite. Completely. The people kill them. This sort of thing, right? So I remember the first time, they check out the kids, and I'm very proud, as parents are proud of their kids. Yeah. They check out the kids as to their athleticism, and they check all these, different sprints and accuracy and throwing and all this stuff. And so the coach turns in and says, kid, you're a quarterback. So they stick him in as a quarterback. He didn't know what that was.
Sure.
I mean, very young.
Yeah.
Right? 8 years old, whatever it was. And I remember the first time he gets the ball hiked to him, this defensive end, no one blocks him because no one knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
Comes running in, and Alicia and I are watching on the grassy knoll, to make another reference in history. We're watching this, and I see this coming a mile away. Oh, shit. And of course, this kid, Braxton doesn't see him. It's from his blind side. Mm-hmm. This kid nails him. Yeah. Airborne, what we call a decleater.
Okay.
Raises you out of your cleats. Yeah. I mean, you're okay. So we're watching, and Braxton gets up, bounces back up like a Gumby,
Sure.
And so I turned to Alicia and I said, so what do you think about that? She said, well, now that I know he's up, I'm fine.
Right.
And I knew I had a football mom.
Wow. That was the moment it was going to work, that we can do this.
Exactly right. But that's that tough love. You put them, yes, in the zone of danger, but is it going to kill them? No. Yeah. And maybe that's extreme, but you get the idea.
Yeah. Everything in its own sort of.
They got to find their own journey.
For sure.
You can't hold their hand forever.
Unfortunately not. So kind of speaking on what you just touched on with your wife, Alicia, mm-hmm. about relationships, do you think there is a perfect person for someone in this world?
Boy, that is a tough question.
Yeah.
I think the world is so large, there are probably many people that fit that bill. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, when you meet someone, if they are one of those people.
So before you go into, because a problem that I feel I had when I was in previous relationships and looking for relationships is a lot of times people said, there's just this feeling, or and I would have that feeling with someone, mm-hmm. but then a year later, I would have a little different feeling. And it wasn't that, the honeymoon feeling that a lot of people get when they first meet someone. And so,
right.
I don't know if you can talk about that, because it's not going to be the same.
Sure. No, it wanes over time, and it goes through its own journey.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the relationship develops over time. I think there needs to be an instant attractiveness
Okay.
to physical
Yeah.
attractiveness to each other. And then maybe within months, literally, there needs to be that mental attractiveness too. So that's when spend a little more time talking, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing.
Huge,
Yeah.
because that's the long game. And you need to see if you're on the same page, whether it be the same moral compass or, bigger issues. Do you want to have, I mean, some people don't want to have kids, especially today, which breaks my heart. So, there are certain litmus tests that need to occur in conversations, I think, to know whether you're in for the long game with that person.
Right. Exactly. And I think it's obviously talking in general is great, but like you're saying, there's certain the tougher conversations, in order to have a family or have these things with someone, this is a little bit of the mindset maybe we need to be on, and are they there, and maybe what are their opinions on these things. And
yeah, I mean, there are just certain things I think you need to be on the same page. Many other things you don't need to be.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. I mean, that's what makes the world go round, is different opinions.
Right.
So I think that's great, as long as we can discuss those civilly. And, today's politics have taken over our culture.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
especially personal lives as well.
Personal lives and personal relationships. And that brings a great sadness to me. But I think that differing opinions and talking about it and critical thinking are essential. And when when I was in my 20s, there was really, I can't imagine there was much critical thinking going on.
Okay.
That comes with time.
Yeah.
So you're just moving forward and doing what seems right in the moment.
Sure.
And sure, there's planning, but it's more short term.
Yeah.
And you're not thinking so long term.
Mm-hmm.
Long term, yeah, you can think it generally, but it's unrealistic.
So one question regarding, well, I was going to speak about it financially when we got there, but was there a moment where your head kind of shifted from me to us when you were thinking about maybe a future, a family, and things like that?
Absolutely. So when I was in my 20s, I dated a lot.
Sure.
And I could have met the right person and it wouldn't have mattered.
Right.
Because the timing was
you weren't in maybe the right mindset too.
Was not in the right mindset. I was in the mindset of me having fun, and every dollar I made once I was in the workforce, I spent, and it was just me, fun.
Yeah.
And then after a while, I got tired of the dating scene.
Why? Because I feel like I've had this more recent, when I say more recently, in the past year or two.
Yeah, it seemed inauthentic. I like to joke that the week before I met my wife, I went out to dinner with a date, a woman I'd been seeing for a little while. And, she'd order salad for dinner. It seemed fake to me. Now, people eat salads. Hell, I eat salads all the time now. But, the first time I met Alicia, she ordered a big steak.
Okay.
It just seemed more real.
So you felt like she wasn't being her true self when she was with you.
The girl before.
Right.
Yeah, that you put on airs and you put on, to a certain extent, I think that is necessary. You do need to bring your A game.
It's natural too.
Yeah. I mean, you definitely, you're not spending 24/7 with someone at that point.
Right.
And sure, if you don't bring your A game, they'll find someone who will. So I get that.
Yeah.
I absolutely get that. But that just wore on me after a while. And I was to the point in my life where I wanted to meet someone that was real and more long term.
Sure.
And so when I met Alicia, uh, that was it for me.
Yeah.
That was it. I
Yeah.
stopped dating cold turkey.
Amazing. Amazing.
I think back on it now, and it really is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's a beautiful thing that you found that in the time you did, and look what's come of it. So
Late 20s.
late 20s. Gotcha.
That,
So
that was just me. That was
yeah,
the timing on my journey.
yeah,
Everyone's different.
right. And with my girlfriend now, so we've sort of had two relationships in that we broke up maybe 4 or 5 months ago.
Mhm.
And in the first relationship, I almost felt like exactly like you were with the first girl. We were together, but we weren't ourselves really, and open and vulnerable. And and sort of recently I've realized that I have more issues with being vulnerable with people, especially
Mhm.
people close to me. And so I was sort of fighting with myself, which I didn't know at the time. And so I couldn't be open to her and sort of show my true self. And so once we broke up, it kind of hit me like a little bit that I hadn't been myself around many people in a long time, since I was really young, when I didn't
Mhm.
care. And she didn't really care about, like, I could be myself around her. And so during that whole process, we had an opening up, and I was able to be vulnerable. And that was kind of the first time it clicked a little bit in my head.
Right.
And I said this was going to be something that I committed to, and that whatever problems or discussions we needed to have, that we were going to have them. And if I was going to cry, which is something that I didn't want to do or don't want to do in front of people,
Right.
that was what was going to happen.
Well, I think the issue of opening yourself up to vulnerability and the hesitancy to do that is failure.
Absolutely.
So no one wants to fail.
Yeah.
But you have to take that risk or you won't succeed.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's an absolute, this is actually, I want to make a reference to another
Go for it.
Famous person. So Teddy Roosevelt, who is one of my favorite presidents,
Yeah.
Made a speech in Sorbonne, France.
Okay.
And I think it was this date today,
Really?
April 23rd in 1910.
What a coincidence.
And I did not plan this. I just looked at this, before this interview.
Gives me chills right now.
Right?
Yeah.
And so this is part of a larger speech that he gave, but it's in the middle of the speech, and it's the most famous part of his speech. And it's my most favorite view on life,
Yeah.
especially in business, but all aspects of life. And I could read it to you now if you want.
Absolutely, please.
It's called The Man in the Arena.
Just maybe turn it a little bit that way so we can, yeah.
Like this?
Yeah, just so we're not looking at the back.
Oh, okay. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while doing greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. That's Teddy Roosevelt, April 23rd, 1910, in Sorbonne, Paris.
That's the day today.
That's today's date.
That's crazy.
And that tells it like it is. You got to throw your hat in the ring,
Yeah.
or you don't give yourself a chance.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times, honestly, the hardest thing, and I've told a little bit about my backstory here, but I served in the military the past 2 or 3 years. And so coming back from that, I felt like, oh, I've faced the hardest physical challenges I'll ever have to face, the hardest mental, but I was completely wrong. And the hardest thing that I've started to have to do is turn inwards and look at myself. And because I realized just how much I was holding myself back just because I had this thought that if I'm not good at something right away, I'm a failure automatically. Or if people see that I'm maybe not good at this right away, then their view of me changes. And so it was a lot of thinking about how much others were thinking about me. But in reality, most people spend very little time thinking about you, and it's all in your head.
I was going to say, you got to get over that.
Oh, I agree. I agree completely. And it's something that I've built up for so long. So that's why it's so built into, like, that's where my head goes now. And only now I've been able to hear my own thoughts as they're happening almost. And I think that's one of the hardest things as a human is self-reflection. And the more I've been learning to do it, the better results and the better relationships have become.
Yeah, for sure. Self-reflection is essential. And I tend to do it on the decade birthdays.
Okay.
Because you wonder when you're 30.
Well, on the larger scale, you're saying.
On the larger scale. Yeah.
You
know, when you turn 30, 40, 50, 60.
Sure. We'll get there.
Yeah, yesterday was my 61st.
Right. Happy
birthday.
Amazing.
But on the decade birthdays especially, you reflect back and you think, is this where I envision myself? Is this where I want to be at this age in life? Right. And so I find myself on the decades, they're not difficult birthdays, they're reflective birthdays.
Okay.
So that's what that reminded me.
I like that. And on a daily basis, how do you, or I guess a weekly or more than 10 years apart, how do you maintain, because every once in a while we need to check in with ourselves and kind of see where we're at and where we're at mentally. And so how have you do you have anything that you do consciously on a regular basis, or is it more of something you've just built into your...
So you say a regular basis.
Yeah.
I'm constantly telling my kids that routine is a good thing.
Okay.
A lot of people think that you get in a rut.
Sure.
And routine is synonymous with boring.
Mm-hmm.
Not really, because you can be knocked off of your routine in a moment's notice, and you have to be able to accommodate that and be, quick on your feet to recover from those curveballs.
Yeah.
But routine, I think, has been the key ingredient throughout my entire life.
Okay. So that kind of, did you have another thing you wanted to add there?
No, I could give you an example.
Go for it.
Or not. So
I have a follow-up question.
Yeah. So I take a multivitamin, multi-mineral every day of my life since I was a kid.
Okay.
I've developed new things to my routine. It's constantly changing.
Yeah.
So, we have lemon water every single morning.
Yeah.
Without exception. The day goes on. There are certain things I do every single day.
Yeah. So a thing that I'm trying to incorporate into this podcast, and something that will happen at the end, but I forgot to mention at the beginning because you're supposed to a little bit thinking about it, is I will have you at the end think of a question to ask to my next guest about business, life, whatever. And so I had Alina on, and her question to you, which you kind of led yourself into it right now a bit, was, let's see. What does the first hour of your morning look like?
Okay. So as much as I've tried to stay away from electronics the first hour, I haven't succeeded
Yeah, it's tough.
in that, in that I run a law firm and am responsible for a lot of people and uh, including clients. And I also have a couple of different business interests that I'm in charge of also. So
Right.
I've just got a lot of balls in the air.
Yeah, and they're all accessible through your phone.
And some of them, involve people on the East Coast.
Sure.
And I have a lawyer now. He's up at 6 a.m. And he gets his best work in from 6 to 8 a.m. So I've got to respond or I lose him.
Right.
So I'm still working on that.
Sure.
So I think that all of life is a work in progress.
Yeah.
But to get back to your original question, my first hour, I work out 6 days out of 7 a week, six out of 7 days.
Is the off day always the same day?
It is now.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, Tuesday mornings.
Okay. Gotcha.
Because I go to something else. I have to be at a meeting at 7 a.m.
Yeah.
Networking group. So I never let the foot off the gas.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm just go, go, go. But I think that the physical has always been an important part of my life.
For sure.
And it helps the mental. At least I've convinced myself it does.
Yeah, I think there's science to back that up.
So every single morning, 6 out of 7 days a week, and I would probably do it 7 days a week, but as each decade gets a little more difficult to meet the challenge.
Sure.
But regardless of that, I work out every morning, and that is in my routine. So I get up, I get dressed. I'm kind of glancing at my phone,
Yeah.
trying not to get bogged down in that because I've got my day ahead of me.
Yeah.
And there are certain things I need to do before I can really pay 100% attention to the emails that are
Gotcha.
inundating me. So I get up, I make the lemon water, I start the coffee, I hit the gym. So that is my first hour.
Amazing. And like you said, you're now 61 and it's still changing and still getting better or improving and kind of shaping to your own life.
I always try to improve the routine.
Mm-hmm.
So even on my workouts, I try and think, what can I add or modify to always change it up?
Yeah.
How can I make it better? So I'm really proud of myself. The last 6 months or so, I've added burpees.
Those suck.
To my routine. They suck. And so because they suck, I thought, all right, I'm going to approach this like I do with my workload at my desk. I'm going to grab the most difficult item first, tackle that, and then it makes my day better after that.
I think that's a really important thing. And I've heard so many podcasts and people talk about if you can accomplish a very challenging goal in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
you almost feel like everything is a little bit that much easier during the day. That challenge that comes up later, you're like, well, I've done this.
At least keeps it in perspective.
Right. But that's it. I think a huge part of life is perspective and comparison, and perspective goes along with you comparing yourself to other people, and just your whole way of life is a perspective. You see yourself in perspective to the things that you've done, the other people around you. And so keeping tabs on your perspective of life, I think is a huge plus if you can, and a way to kind of check yourself and adapt to different parts of life.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this goes back to the reflection issue. You always want to almost look at yourself from outside,
right,
and see, does this meet common sense? Is this an appropriate response to that person?
Right.
It goes, you can think about any particular circumstance where it can apply, but I often do that. Even when I'm in court and arguing before the court, I do that reflectiveness
mm-hmm.
that is necessary to make what I think is an effective argument. So when I'm dealing with people, when it's in a personal relationship, when you're encountering an issue that requires your critical thinking,
Right.
anything in life really, what's the best way to address this in this moment, given all the circumstances?
Yeah.
Because everything's
and
different.
you get better at that, and
you do get better.
Right. I've slowly been learning that as well, and because in the beginning I feel like it was very hard to do that almost in the moment, and I would almost go hours afterwards and still either be mad or have the same emotions that I was in the moment, and only maybe a day later I would be reflecting, like, wait a second, maybe I wasn't exactly right or doing
right. But you're still being reflective.
Yes.
Just a day later.
Right. So
the goal is always to shorten that time period.
Exactly.
And if you can do it in the moment and think on your feet. So one of the things that I've learned when I started my practice, on my own,
Mhm.
it was with another partner, but I was the managing partner, and you have to make the ultimate decision. So mentally, when someone would come to me with a question, I pictured myself looking over my shoulder. What's the answer to that? But there was no one there. It was me.
Yeah.
So I learned very quickly in going into business for myself, you're it. The buck stops with you. You need to make a decision, good or bad.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's good, more times than it's bad.
Sure.
But that's not 100%. But the key is making a decision.
Mm-hmm.
So, during the day now, people come at me throughout the day. I'll be in the middle of something or talking to someone on the phone, trying to multitask, and then someone else comes in with something that on my radar is down here. I'm dealing with something up here, and they want their answer. But they can't move forward with their job unless they get the answer to that question.
Right.
So I've got to stop everything that I'm doing, address them, and then bounce back like a rubber band to the issue at hand. So the key is making the decision.
Yeah.
I think. And you have to quickly do those mental gymnastics to weigh
I mean, you're weighing a million things in your own head at the same time.
Yeah. It's not like on TV with the angel and the devil.
Sure.
There's so many more things that come into play. And you're playing those mental gymnastics, almost a chess game,
mm-hmm.
and trying to see 3 steps down the road, what does this mean if I make choice A?
And I think as we get older, the beauty of it is we're not actively almost doing a million things at once. We're almost training and building patterns and routines in our own brain that allow us to do the things that we want and the outcome that we want to have happen. So that's the maturing part of it, I think.
It is, and I think that the longer you live on this planet, the more experiences you have, so the more you have to reflect upon or base that reflection upon. And there's just nothing like experience. There's just nothing like time. So, I think that there's an old expression, youth is wasted on the young.
Yeah.
And as funny as that is, as glib or as that is, it's really true. So these expressions are there for a reason.
Right.
They don't just spring up out of comedians.
Yeah.
They actually come from experience, from older people.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very funny. I haven't thought about that, like what that actually means in a while, but yeah, that is funny.
Yeah.
So I'm realizing that we could almost talk for a couple of days on straight, on one after the other, but there's 2 things that I want to cover here.
Sure.
One, before we get into money and what all your perspective on money is, what is I think a huge, not problem, but I feel like in the younger society that I'm from, a lot of people have this idea that, I just don't have motivation, or I'm just not motivated all the time, and that's my problem. But I feel like discipline beats motivation every time. And so I don't know your thoughts on that. And because motivation is almost fleeting, and it comes and it goes, and we can't live like that. You know what I mean?
So what you just said, discipline is, more superior or drives motivation is where you should ultimately go. But how do you get that discipline?
Right.
So it reminds me when I was a kid, we didn't have all the toys that kids have now.
Sure.
And so, my mom would say, well, go out and play. I was totally bored as a kid. But that was really important because from boredom becomes or arrives creativity. And from creativity, it builds on itself.
Yeah.
And so I think that is a good spot to build on for motivation.
Yeah.
I think it all ties into each other. So now when people are not motivated, I see that they already have everything they need.
Right.
There's no struggle there.
Mm-hmm.
So if you need to struggle for something, you're going to be motivated.
Right. It's almost not even a decision. It's just.
Yeah. I mean, they said, they talk about the generation that lived through World War II and the Depression was our strongest generation. Why is that? Well, they had to struggle.
Right.
I mean, I think about my grandparents, and that was a situation where a brother and a sister married a brother and a sister.
Mm.
You don't get that these days.
No.
But that was really out of necessity, and they lived together in a very small apartment, the four of them. They all four worked during the Depression, and they would sit at the kitchen table, and whatever they earned that day, they would put in the middle of the table.
Wow.
And that would determine what they would have for dinner.
That's like a whole other world.
Whole other world. I can't relate
even
to that.
Right. And I can't even fathom.
But it's that concept that made them strong and motivated to work.
Right.
And did they sit around and say, gee, what do I want to do with my life? No, they had to eat dinner.
Right.
So it's that struggle, I think, that is the motivating factor that people need, which ultimately turns into discipline.
Yeah.
So they became disciplined workers and contributors to society from the motivation that they gained from their struggle.
Gotcha. I didn't think about it like that. So that was, I like that you said that. And also I feel like in our day and age, it's almost hard to be bored. Everything that we have social media, we have Netflix, everyone is trying to stop boredom almost and make things as easy as possible. And it's amazing the things that we can do with technology now. But the people that are struggling, I think you almost have to go out of your way a little bit to make life a little bit more difficult on yourself these days. And the people that are succeeding are the people that are putting themselves in that situation. And those that are not are stuck at home watching countless hours and that's been me. And that's been, I'm sure, a lot of people. And that's been a struggle that I've been dealing with, how much to be on my phone. And I would love to delete social media right now, but it hasn't happened. So I think that's a huge part of our society now is.
Yeah, social media has consumed us and has robbed, I think, younger people of the ability to be creative in their conversation,
right,
and in their approach in life. So, we could have a whole topic on social media, but the concept of filling our day with what other people think is nonsense to me. And look at your friend Braxton, my son.
Yeah.
He has never cared about what other people think.
Yeah. He's very good at that.
He's very good at that.
Yeah.
And that's actually, I think, one of his strongest character traits.
I agree.
Harder to do, easier said than done.
That's one of the hardest things for me. So it's something I admire and I've noticed about him and more in front of my eyes in the past little while. So
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. So one of the things that I have learned from Dennis Prager,
Yeah.
who's in my mind a motivational speaker, although that's not how he characterizes himself, is that I prefer clarity over agreement. That comes directly from him, and I use that in my everyday life. And I tell clients that.
Yeah.
And they rely on me not to be. At least I tell them, I'm not going to be your yes man. I'm going to tell you're paying me to think and to give you my experience and knowledge. And so I'm going to tell you the way it is.
Right. Maybe not the news you want to hear.
Right. Yeah. But a lot of people see that as being confrontational.
Right.
I don't. I just see it as being direct and giving people the skinny, whether it's good or bad.
Yeah. And of course there's lines to everything, but I feel like that directness has been lost a lot these days. And you could get a message to someone who you've never met, seen before with social media these days. And so a lot of the content that's out there isn't meant for the people that are seeing it almost as well. So
For sure.
there's so many different messages you can get that almost have different opposing ideas and you don't exactly know what the context was. And
well, and the other thing that social media, not to go down that rabbit
Right.
hole too far, but the one thing that I think it reveals is people are very willing to say certain things on social media that they wouldn't if they're talking face to face.
Absolutely.
It's that confrontational piece that people stray away from.
Yeah.
So, as a litigator for over 30 years in Los Angeles, obviously I have confrontations.
Couple, I'm sure.
Do I like confrontations? No. Actually, I do not like confrontations.
Okay.
I like to work around and figure out a good place in the middle, median, where we can reach an agreement. And a judge told me once, and I tell my clients this: a compromise or the sweet spot on a settlement is where both parties are unhappy. And you think about that, wow, that's really true. And so I think if people applied that in their lives, maybe they would realize that it's not their way or the highway.
Right.
So it's not drawing a line in the sand. We're never going to come together on issues with that attitude. So do I like confrontation? Of course not. But sometimes the directness is interpreted as confrontational.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that was one of the more important points we've touched on. But I want to get into money here a little bit.
Sure.
And so, throughout your career, what has changed in your perspective of money? What does it provide for you in life right now, I would say?
Obviously, comfort.
Sure.
Peace to a certain extent, although I don't think it matters what age you are or what your lot in life is. I think or at least for me personally, you're always not comfortable where you are. You always strive for more.
Yeah.
And that's not just for money, but just in workouts, in relationships, in all aspects. But sticking with your question on money, I think that I've always had money in the background of decisions I make in the business world.
Sure.
That's always been part of it.
Yeah, kind of has to be.
It's a necessary part of that. But my mother actually taught us something early on in life,
Okay.
and that is to include yourself in the bills. So you pay the utility bill, you pay your rent or mortgage, you pay yourself.
Yeah.
So that way, you're always going to get paid, and pay yourself first,
Right.
because otherwise you'll spend it all. So including yourself is one of those bills. What I mean by that is set up an automatic withdrawal payment, or write yourself a check, whatever it is,
Yeah.
and you build up that savings. So I remember when I was 29 years old, my mom put $100 into a mutual fund.
Okay.
For me, $100 for Alicia, and then my brother Glenn and his wife Darcy. So she spent $400, and we had to. But the catch was that we had to contribute each month to that mutual fund,
Okay.
and we could invest whatever we wanted.
Sure.
So we started at 20. I think it was 29 years old, and we each put in $25 a month.
Okay.
Each.
Were you guys initially on board with this idea from the
Yeah.
start? Okay.
Sounded good to us.
Yeah.
So, consistent with the part about paying yourself, it was building on a savings.
Okay.
And so, the best thing that I think a lot of younger people don't realize is time is on their side. And that's what I've taught my kids who are early.
I think we've also heard it a lot.
Yeah.
But understand and grasping that, for me, even though I'm speaking to you and I hear your words right now, it's hard for me to grasp. Like, okay, if I just started today versus 5 years later, it makes that much of a difference. And
it really, really does.
Yeah.
And you've heard about compounding interest and all that sort of stuff. But I just can't emphasize it enough. Sure. That time is your friend. And so the older you get, it's, you've heard people talk about, oh boy, this last year went so quickly. And it seems the older you get, the quicker the years go. It's like that roll of toilet paper, the closer you get to finishing off that roll, the faster that roll goes. When you first start with that big roll of toilet paper, I got plenty of time. But when you start to go down, it goes very quickly.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the same thing about years in life. And also it equates to money. So if you can start putting away just a few shekels every single month, but be consistent. This goes back to the word routine.
Yeah. And
it just becomes part of your mantra, part of your everyday. Then before you know it, when you're 30, you'll have whatever, $5,000 in the bank, whatever it is.
Sure.
But you don't want to wake up 30 and not have that.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? And you didn't miss it. It was a Starbucks coffee every day or whatever.
Yeah. That's honestly
it's very little.
Right. That's how I've sort of started to put it into my head was, okay, I just didn't go to Starbucks that day, or I didn't get this one little thing. And so maybe I'll take that money that I would have done that with, and it's just gone into.
Exactly right. And then throughout life, you set goals for yourself. At least this is what I have done.
Mm-hmm.
Is, hey, by 33, I want to put this much away a month, or I want to have this much in the bank. How do I get there? Oh, it's this much. If I want $5,000 by then, well, 60 months divided by 5,000,
right.
How much is it? So, I'm constantly doing little calculations like that throughout my whole life.
Yeah, it's good to break big things down into more.
For sure, because it's easier to tackle $100 a month than $100,000.
Right, and I think that relates to not only we're talking about a huge thing right now is goals, things you want to achieve, breaking them down into they're enormous when you first think about them, and most people just think about them and they go out the other year because they're like, okay, well, that's going to take me that long, and that's like too big to grasp right now. So
yeah, you can't do that, or you'll never get started. So you have to start,
Yeah.
or you have nothing to build on.
Yeah.
So it's getting started and then getting in that routine and staying consistent. And you know what? You forget about it, especially if you set up an automatic withdrawal
Right.
because it's just
Right.
taken out of
I
your
think
bank account.
that's a huge thing, and I still haven't done that. So I should.
Start tomorrow.
Yeah, I need
It's Monday.
to. There's a lot of things that I know I will talk about, and a couple of things that we've talked about so far with my sister that I know would, there's those things would be good for you,
Conceptually, yeah.
but you just haven't done them for whatever reason, and I don't exactly know where that comes from yet. But
Well, you just need to start, and you can't be afraid of failure.
Yeah.
Because you will fail. It's inevitable. No one is perfect. You have to fail, but then you learn from that failure and you build on that. That's all.
Yeah.
So and just because let's say 1 month you can't make that $25 or $100 a month contribution or whatever. Okay, so you don't make it. Do you stop for the rest
Right,
of the year?
that's another thing.
Of course not.
Yeah.
You get back on the train.
Yeah.
You have to stay on there. Otherwise, by the end of the year, you're not going to be $25 off or $100 off. You're going to be $500 off.
Right.
So get back on the horse when you get bucked off.
Yeah. Yeah, that's huge. So when it comes to bad days, and let's say you have something that is coming up that you're anxious about or uncertain, how do you not let that eat you alive?
So
do you have do you have like a process that you go through in your head of breaking something down, or?
Yeah, so there's a couple parts to that. One is a sports analogy: be a goldfish.
Okay.
And this is something that I've really spent time talking to Alicia about, talking to my kids about, and that is that how do you think quarterbacks when they get intercepted, or you could use it in almost any sport.
Yeah.
How do they get back out there and perform?
I've also wondered this.
Goldfish.
Okay.
Short memory. Don't dwell on the past. Focus on the present as a new opportunity every time.
Right.
Because you reset yourself. Tennis. You hit a bad shot. Well, your game is going to go downhill if you focus on that.
Yeah.
Ice skaters, when they fall in competition, which we see all the time when we watch the Olympics. That's about the only time I've watched ice skating. But they fall and they get back up, and you think, how the hell did they do that?
Yeah.
Goldfish. They forget about it, and they know they have the ability to do it, and they just focus on this next jump that they know they can do it. If they focus on the what happened 5 seconds ago,
yeah,
they will fail again.
Yeah. So it brings me back to, I played baseball growing up, and I can specifically remember my junior year, I believe it was. So before this had happened, I had been injured twice in a row. Which the first one took 6 months of recovery. It was 3 ligaments in my ankle that were torn. And then I had a head injury with my good friend, Johnny DeLuca, who's in the big leagues now. So we always joke about it. But so those things back to back put me out for about 8 months. And in my head, whether I still had the skill or not, I had lost, and I was doing really, really well before.
Yeah.
I had lost some of that. And then so leading up to season, this was all leading up to season. Once season had come around, I had just been negative self-talking after that point. And so we get to this crucial game in playoffs, and I make an error that takes us out of the playoffs. And that destroyed me. And luckily, I thought luckily at the time, we weren't really playing anymore after this. So I didn't have to show my face. I didn't have to be out there. And that, I thought everyone remembered this for the rest of their lives. And in my head, this was the biggest deal that had happened. And every time I stepped on the baseball field after that, I looked at the parents, I looked at the players, and I saw what had happened before, as if they were thinking about it consciously as I was. And so what you said there about having a goldfish memory, Absolutely true. And for me, it was thinking that everyone else didn't have the same, like, no one cares about you that much. They maybe they care about you, but they're not thinking about you or the mistakes you've made
Certainly not
that
as
much.
much as you are
Right,
thinking about you.
absolutely. And so I guess what would you say if would have helped in that situation maybe, or
Unfortunately, people are judgmental,
yeah,
and oftentimes you hear about, the pitcher that took them out of the playoffs in 1972, and
sure,
many people do unfortunately have that judgmental attitude that you just described. But for you, and you can't control other people or
of
other
course.
people's thoughts. So that's one thing I think you have to reconcile within yourself.
Yeah,
You can't control you. You are in control of you.
right.
And that goes to your reaction when people say things to you that infuriate you. How are you going to react to that?
Yeah,
Don't let other people control you. And I think the best advice, if that's what you're asking for, or at least my perspective,
yeah, yeah,
is that you are in control of you.
right.
And so, one comfort direction I give to my clients right before they're stepping into a deposition is the one comfort they can always fall back on, because questions can become debilitating, uh, very uncomfortable at times, the way they're worded
Sure.
in a deposition. The one comfort that the client can always fall back on is they are the one in the room with the most knowledge because they lived it.
Right.
The attorney asking the questions is just digging.
Sure.
And whether it's for information or to rile them up or whatever the purpose of the question is,
Yeah.
that the client actually lived through that circumstance,
right,
and is in control of the answer. They're not in control of the question.
Right.
They're in control of the answer. So I think that's a good directive in life, that you are in control of how you march forward from that point on.
Right.
And you can decide what your journey is going to be, or at least what you're going to attempt your journey to be.
Sure.
So you dictate the direction and your response to the moment. Don't let others do that.
So when we spoke about money, obviously money is a factor of success, like you said, but that wasn't the reason you're here today. You weren't like, oh, I need to make a bunch of money and here we are. I don't think you would have a lot of fulfillment that way. So were there any points in your success where, okay, money might be a little more difficult right now, or maybe we're having a difficult point in our life right now, but this is what's important, and I'm just glad,
Oh my goodness, you touched back a point in my memory. So as a lawyer, I've always made decent money. Of late, much better
Sure.
money. But the road to success on the financial front was not always rosy. It's a roller coaster, and especially running your own business.
Right.
It's constant. It's not about profit. It's about cash flow.
Right.
So I learned that the hard way, but you got to stay in the saddle. You can't miss a payroll. You can't, people want to be paid for the,
people's lives relying on you.
Yeah. I've often said, boy, if I could just miss one payroll, I could get ahead, well, people don't work that way.
Yeah, that's not how it works.
So, 2008, 2010, working up to 2010, the world went through a big financial crisis where people were overextended, et cetera. And the timing was such that it hit us very hard.
Sure.
And so we were successful up until then, financially, and in every aspect.
Yeah.
2 kids, great relationship.
Right.
Everything was humming along. This hit us, and it was difficult, and we almost lost our home. And I remember calling the kids in and uh, and saying we didn't know if we were going to keep our home,
Yeah.
and that we were going to have to adjust, but that we have each other, and really home is where the heart is. It doesn't matter where we live, we have each other.
Yeah.
And so we live a life of gratitude, and we focus on that being the ultimate key to success. We talk about a lot of different keys to success, but I think attitude of being great, every day being
Grateful for.
grateful, but being a blessing, that we wake up every day and we count our blessings.
Right.
And it's that gratitude that drives us every day.
I heard I'm gonna butcher this, but there was a guy asking another guy a question on a social media platform, and he was saying, well, tomorrow if I handed you $1 million, how would your mood be? How would you be going around?
Mm-hmm.
He was like, well, I'd be pretty happy. I don't think
Sure.
anything could really bring me down. But then the guy said, well, if in handing you that $1 million, you wouldn't wake up the next morning, how would you feel? He was like, well, not very good. He was like, so you waking up every day is worth more than $1 million, is what you're saying to me. And so we take it for granted, is what I'm saying. And I think it's a huge gratitude is probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, aspects or pieces of an attitude that we should remember and is a huge part of should be a huge part of our.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many things that I'm grateful for.
Yeah.
Not only my health, God forbid it doesn't change tomorrow.
Yeah.
But my relationships with my kids and my wife and my family, I'm grateful for that. And that has nothing to do with money.
Mm-hmm.
Money is obviously an important factor to
Right.
success, but again, it's not everything.
I think it's an amplifier of whatever you have.
For sure. It does make things easier.
Right. But I think if things are already going in a negative way and you get money, it's just going to push them in that way.
Sure. If you are a good person, you're going to be a good person even in trying times.
Right.
If you're not a good person, you're going to be not a good person even in good times.
Right.
So I think that attitude and being grateful for everything that God has given us. My grandmother used to say, and I didn't really appreciate that until later in life, is it's better to be lucky than good. And that always troubled me, because aren't we supposed to strive to be good?
Sure.
So I think the goodness comes with the territory. You are a good person depending on how your parents raise you and the character traits you develop over time. But the lucky part comes that's what you should be grateful about. With our health, we are stuck, for lack of a better term, with our DNA.
Right.
But we're in control of everything else, the environmental. So that's why I eat well, work out, because those are things I'm in control of.
Yeah.
I'm not in control of what DNA mom and dad gave me.
Sure.
But everything else I am. So why not do the best that you can? And so I'm grateful for all those things.
And I think a lot of anxiety these days, and I've felt it as well, where I catch myself worrying about things that I don't have control over, that I will never have control over. And you can get so lost and wrapped up in those thoughts. So
I'm going to give you a short story.
Go for it.
So Alicia and I were on our honeymoon.
Yeah.
And we were fortunate enough to be able to go to Greece for our honeymoon.
Yes.
And we're on the plane, and it turns out that the plane, they didn't do something with the plane.
Okay.
I think they didn't empty the sewage or something like that. And so as a result of all this, we lost an entire day of our trip, which is huge, because everything was scheduled.
Yeah. That's
this tour and that tour and so forth.
Right.
And Alicia was really getting anxious and starting to it was starting to affect the joy
Sure.
in our trip. So I remember talking to her at that time and saying, we're not in control of this. There's nothing we can do. The
Yeah.
plane is going to stop. We are going to lose a day. Let's figure this out. Don't let them ruin our entire trip.
Yeah, absolutely.
Her attitude changed from that day till today, because you can't control what is outside of the extent of your hands, if you
Right.
will. And so what did we do? We missed that first day. We scheduled that trip for the last day. We had a little bit of time, and we still got it all in. We had a fantastic honeymoon.
Yeah.
And it's that change in attitude. If you go in and let someone else or some other action or some curveball ruin it for you, well, you've just ruined it for yourself.
Yeah. And I think that, I mean, there's so many connecting pieces here, but
Yeah.
changing your attitude or your perspective. And I had this sort of happen to me in real time the other day. So there's certain points in your life when you feel like, okay, I feel like I have a handle on things and I know how things are going, and maybe things are going pretty good. And all of a sudden a couple things add up. You're like, oh, well, how did I get here again? And,
Right.
And so I sort of had that happen. And my sister was talking about this happening to her previously. And she was like, well, yeah, I was going great. And then all of a sudden some things happened, but I didn't look at them as failures or hardships. I looked at them as, whoa, like this is something I can learn from. This is something that I can grow from. And so that little perspective change of like, this isn't a negative thing, or even if it may be in the moment, this is going to be something amazing for me in the future.
Right.
That can change a whole, how you react to something.
Well, and oftentimes you don't know if these are stepping stones.
Yeah.
Or if they're necessary in the process for the road that you're going down, because you can't evaluate everything in the moment. My goal is just to circle the wagons, if you will, and make the best choice possible based on what I know in that particular moment.
Absolutely.
It may be a week or a month or a year later that you reflect back and you think, God, why didn't I think of that?
Sure.
But you can't control that. You just get better at it over time.
And the same podcast that I was listening to with the guy that was from Microsoft and all of that, he was talking about negative and positive thoughts, and almost all negative thoughts are in the past or in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And almost all positive are in the moment. So it's about kind of being in the moment and looking right in front of you versus worrying about what happened or what could happen.
Right.
So I think that's super.
And that actually helps with anxiety and worrying.
Absolutely.
So many people waste so much energy on worry.
Yeah.
And to me, that's not efficient.
Sure, absolutely.
It serves no purpose.
Yeah.
Because you're certainly not in control of the past, but there's only so much we can do about future outcomes.
Yeah.
So you can plan and prepare, and you should, but ultimately the expression "man plans and God laughs" is true. And I think that once you realize that, sure, you set up the odds in your favor. That's the best we can do, is set up the odds in our favor. But the ultimate outcome is unknown, if that makes sense.
Right. And the less we worry about it, the less anxiety we're going to have. Like we were talking about before, you're in control of what you're in control of.
Absolutely. I mean, use all that energy that you would have spent on anxiety for planning and preparing.
Yeah.
And you'll lessen the worst outcome.
Absolutely. I think this is a good point to end on.
Okay.
And first, I want to thank you for being here. It's been, it was your birthday yesterday, and so I'm glad we got to take the time to do this. And what I was thinking of while we were doing this was, I'm going to enjoy listening back to it, but I think your kids and the people that know you especially are going to really enjoy hearing this, as well as I hope there's one person out there that we can have a positive effect on, because and we've been successful. So before we finish off here, I need to ask you your question for the next person we interview. So what would you think that would be?
Well, you haven't given me a lot of time to think about that. I think that what I would want people to address is what their concept of success is. So, what's integral to that and what most people tie into success is financial,
Right.
is money. But it's so much more than that, in my opinion.
Yeah. Thank you for being here. And thank you guys for listening, for those of you that have. And you can find us on Spotify, YouTube, and TikTok as well. So feel free to check us out there. And we will catch you in the next one. Thank you.
Thanks, Jake.